that there's a visceral brain, an emotional brain, a thinking brain, and they develop just like that. So that this brain, this emotional brain, develops before the thinking brain, meaning that thinking comes out of feeling and not the other way around. That's why toxic shame in my belief system and in my treatment work cannot be cured with rational emotive techniques. You can't stay up in your head and cure stuff that's down here. So original pain work means getting the emotion out, doing the grief work, doing the anger work, allowing yourself to tremble with fear, allowing yourself to have the motion of the energy.
Welcome back once again. It's your energy law guys here talking about all things Ohm's Law. And once again this week we're going to have an interesting clip from John Bradshaw, and we're going to show how what he's describing as far as human development, how energy law is actually affecting the psychology of childhood trauma. And we're going to be talking about how we overcome some of these traps that we've inadvertently created in our brain by adapting to the environments we were raised in. Once again, we've got Chris with us. He's going to help us talk about the clip. How you doing today, Chris?
Doing good. Doing good, Jay.
Glad to have you back. How are you feeling about Bradshaw this week? It's a pretty tough clip to get through.
I remember you first introduced me to him a couple of years ago, and wow, absolutely changed my life.
And you've actually done a lot in the last year by applying a lot of the lessons as far as observing the compulsions in yourself. And I don't mind saying it real quick, like you've lost like what, 90 pounds?
Yeah, something like that.
You've quit smoking and drinking.
Yep.
What other things have you got checked off your compulsive list?
I mean, those are the main ones. And you know, it's a slow process. It's a slow process. But I will say Bradshaw is interesting because everybody seems to be focused on symptoms and just doing some mend on a symptom, where he just cuts through right to the truth and goes, nah, you know what the problem is? It's trauma. And all of this, if you can fix this stuff in your mind, all of these other things just become easy to deal with. And I just found that fascinating, that all of the stuff you can read on compulsion and on addiction, all of it is just looking at the symptoms and trying to find a way to deal with the symptoms. But Bradshaw goes right to the problem and just hits it head on. So just amazing.
You can close the doors to these brain systems. You get up here in your thinking brain and you can close the door to your emotional brain. So you can get up here in your head, okay, and all these storms are going on down here. You don't even know that you've got this low-grade chronic depression. You don't even know you've got this rage in there because you're in your head all the time. And that's what I did. I got up in my head and survived. We've got to understand that I could have gone to my death and never known how sad I really was. And you see, when I stopped mood altering, where there was nothing else, no other way to stay in my head, when there was nothing else that I could do, you know, I'd given up drinking, I'd given up smoking, I'd given up, well, I hadn't given up eating, but I was doing a lot. My addictions were pretty much, and then in those lonely moments, that's when that low-grade depression. When I got married, the rage would start coming out. And here was gentle John, here was good old boy John with all this rage. See, so it was like this brain, this part of my brain had cut off this part. Here's where all the original pain is. It's in this feeling brain. In the segments you're going to see toward the end of this program, you're going to see people getting out of their head and getting into their emotions and doing this original pain work. See, first of all, when we set up these ego defenses, we go into denial, we go into delusion, and we have to be confronted with that. It's like my alcoholism is what reduced me to pain, enough pain to say, hey, I got to do something about it. My life is unmanageable. See, I was sober about 10 years, and I realized I was still trying to control all the relationships I was in. I was in my good guy, people-pleasing act. I was never really showing my feelings. I thought I was this wonderful dad, but I wasn't modeling any feelings for my son because I still wasn't in my feelings. when you don't get your developmental dependency needs met, you grow up to be an adult child. You grow up to be a child who didn't get his developmental needs met. And when I don't have my developmental needs, all the kinds of things that I've talked about as to how the child contaminates your life are going to be there. It's very important that we understand that emotions are primary. The primacy of emotion. That our emotions, the emotional brain develops before the thinking brain. That in the limbic system is there. We have 131 million addicts in the United States. Those are all emotional diseases. See, we wonder, why do we have so much addiction? Because we programmatically and systematically repress emotion. And I'm telling you, you can grow up and be in your head and not even know how bad you feel. You can grow up and be in your head. I survived getting in my head. Now, emotion is primary. It moves us. It's energy. Our anger moves us to fight. Our fear moves us to flight. Our sadness moves us to tears. Tears discharge energy. The root of the disease is not healthy shame, which is our limits when children blush or are embarrassed. That is, they're caught with their pants down. They're caught exposed. This is a natural human emotion. Problem in English is we only have one word for shame. Healthy shame is an enormously important emotion. It is the root of conscience and morality. So without a healthy sense of shame, you don't have any conscience or morality. Now, most of us get all of these emotions shamed. And when you grow up in a family and you've got adult children for parents, you can't get them met because your parents have never gotten their needs met. So if your mom was not allowed to have her sadness, she's not going to let you have your sadness. One catastrophic event can change brain chemistry. The more helpless you are, it's like it imprints the brain. Children internalize their parents at their worst. They internalize their parents at their worst when it's the most scary, when it's the most shaming. So that imprint, and then let's say there's something else that happens. You're screamed at, and there's something else that happens. And these are like black holes in space. And they have an energy, and they begin to interconnect, and they form governing scenes. These are the scenes that get acted out. These are the scenes when I talked about the adult child. I talked about this little kid reenacting. The trauma in his life is imprinted there in his brain. And until he grieves it, until he cries, until he beats the bataka stick, until he expresses the anger, it's all imprinted in there. And remember, if emotion is energy, where does the energy go? It goes into our body, into our muscles. Our bodies carry the pain.
I want to start by jumping back in time a little bit because we've known each other our whole adult lives, and we actually met in high school. When we first met, I already had a compulsion that had manifest, but I didn't know that that's what it was at the time, because as soon as the Sony Walkman was available, I had a set of headphones on, and they were on from the second the class ended to the instant I got to the next class I needed to be in. And that's basically how I was functioning in that social environment, because I had all these social anxiety issues. And that's basically when we met. And what I love what he's talking about, and I was the perfect example of it, is that you can get lost inside your head. You can go inside of your head instead of dealing with the emotions. And then you enter a type of delusion. And what that delusion really is the ability for you in your own mind to be having all of these experiences without actually taking the actions required to overcome the resistances to manifest what you really want into reality. And I see that now looking back as an adult, that I spent years as that kid with the headphones on to avoid interaction with other people, and you're one of the people that pulled me out of that. But really what I was doing was I was playing all these elaborate scenarios in my head of things that were going to happen one day. And it's total delusion. And I think the average person in society has really taken this to another level now, because I was like the 1.0 version of people that were constantly connected to a device. There was no one else in our school that was doing that at that time. And I see now as an adult, what it was doing was really allowing me to create all these ideas in my head that nothing ever came from, because it's a lot easier to live in your mind than to actually take the action to overcome the resistance to manifest anything into reality. And I think now it is happening on a massive scale.
Well, yeah, and I think it's way worse. I think you're right on that. Everything that we're struggling with, that I see that Bradshaw is talking about, and the things he's helped me with, and like we were saying about all of these compulsions, addictions, all of this are just ways for us to avoid dealing with emotion. And it is rampant in society right now. The reason I love Bradshaw, like I said in the beginning here, is he really gets to the heart of things. He's actually showing people how to cure themselves. And it wasn't that I stopped smoking because I focused on smoking. Smoking was just a symptom. It seems like our world is more focused on treatment of symptoms than they are on finding an actual cure. If you're a doctor and your business is patients and you cure all your patients, you don't have patients anymore. So it's not a great business strategy. And I think that might be why Bradshaw is so obscure as well, is because he actually did offer a cure. And I don't think many people adopted his approach. And he manages to bypass the symptoms and go, here's the actual problem. Here's where the problem is. And if you just try to tackle that aspect of it, just the trauma-based aspect, and being able to look inside yourself at the emotional side and find that trauma. If you can do that, all the addictive compulsive behaviors, they might not disappear overnight, but they weaken substantially.
2 weeks before COVID hit, someone had uploaded all of these to YouTube, and I found them, and I'd been checking YouTube for them for decades. As soon as YouTube existed, I was looking for this stuff because I couldn't find it anywhere. And then just by a miracle, it all showed up at the exact moment that we were all sent home. And I just hankered down and went through the 20 hours of it, and was just like rocking in the corner like an orange for a couple months after that. Because if you really can focus on what he's showing you to do, it absolutely does work.
And it's very uncomfortable.
Oh God, it's all resistance.
Yes, it's very uncomfortable. I remember you first told me about him, and it was a year before I even could watch that video from one side to the other. And I have no problem reading a book on how to stop addiction. But watching his information, wow, it was tough, but it actually helped.
Oh, I'm a completely different person. 2 years into having gone through those lectures, I am a completely transformed person. And I didn't even take anything official. That's just from me watching the lectures. I never enrolled in any program to actually get treatment. That is how powerful those lectures were. I've got a good mind for creatively extrapolating information, so I could fill in all the blanks just from watching those lectures. And without any outside treatment, I have cured 90% of the compulsions that were governing my life, just from the knowledge.
That's just a big part of it sometimes, is just being shown or being told where the actual issue is. Most people never even get that chance to realize, why they have the compulsions. It's just compulsions are bad and you need to do something about it. There's always that underlying feeling of wanting to escape, not facing that mental resistance.
Path of least resistance instinct is real, and it is a hell of a thing to overcome, because you will always choose runaway.
But once you become aware of it, and that's what his lectures do, is they allow you to be aware. So when it happens now, I'm able to go, now I can see, I can feel that resistance. I can identify that resistance. And and then I can see it for what it is.
And as Bradshaw says, the only way out is through.
And that through isn't that difficult. I find usually if I'm having one of those moments where I'm feeling like a compulsion is coming on, if I can just focus for a few seconds, usually it's maybe about 30 seconds, and just feel those feelings, identify them for what they are, and go, wow, like you really want a cigarette right now. Isn't that an interesting feeling you're having right now? And just be aware of that feeling. You push through it. After about 30 seconds, that feeling starts to fade and you start seeing it for it's just a feeling. And then it just kind of tapers off. Now it comes right back, 20 minutes later, and you do it again. And it does just get easier over time. And I found once I was able to beat one of the compulsions, once I had that toolkit, then I was able to beat the others. And you just beat them back, and it's a daily struggle, and you beat them back, but they do lose their strength.
When he says emotions move us, emotions are a motive force. Well, motive force also means potential difference. So what happens is when resistance is constant and current decreases, potential difference decreases. So when you're encountering that mental resistance that says, just run away, don't do this, and then you don't act as a result, the corresponding decrease in potential difference is literally you becoming powerless. You are powerless. Your inaction is forcing you into a state of powerlessness because potential difference is literally the power source. It's interesting for me that when I was wearing my headphones wandering through school, because the resistance of the social anxiety was ever present, but my inability to engage it was really triggering a corresponding decrease in potential difference that was only amplifying my sense of powerlessness. Because potential difference is the power source. And if the potential difference is decreasing because of your inability or unwillingness to act, you feel this shame, and he's all about shame. The shame that you're actually feeling is a sense of inadequacy in that moment of whatever it is you should be engaging, but you aren't.
Yeah, it's interesting how energy loss seems to hit us on all levels, right? It hits us in our daily lives, but it's there in our minds as well. It's just it's prevalent on all levels, our mental levels as well as our physical levels.
When he talks about our bodies carry the trauma, what he's actually talking about is the programming you've inadvertently created in your mind. Because if your brain is constantly adapting to the environment around you, and whatever action you do take to usually just reduce the resistance instead of overcome it, we modify ourselves to just usually, as children, we're not strong enough to overpower our parents. So the only thing we can really do is minimize the resistance. So when we're minimizing the resistance and we start creating what he calls governing scenes, these governing scenes that he's talking about are the traumatic event that triggered your action that has eventually become amplified through the replaying of these scenes. And then eventually that's how your habits are forming. So you did something and you got punished for it, and then you did something else to avoid being punished next time. What he's really describing is the building of the mental circuitry in your head. He knows that the body is holding the energy somehow, but what we know now, like 30 years later, is where the energy is really doing the most damage is through the circuitry that is being created in your mind, through the repetition of the action of, usually as a child, avoiding the resistance, getting away from the resistance. So even in the action constant reality, if current is constant and resistance decreases, potential difference decreases. So if the only action you can take is to get away from the problem, reduce the resistance by getting away from the problem, there's always a corresponding decrease in potential difference in that scenario as well. And that decreasing potential difference, once again, ends up being translated as a sense of powerlessness.
So I guess in a sense, as we practice some of the things Bradshaw's telling us to, we may actually be building new circuitry to help release that energy, that negative energy.
Exactly, because energy will always flow through the path of least resistance. Well, what's the path of least resistance? It's the pre-existing circuitry you've already created. So you need to create a parallel circuit to the one that's already working, and then eventually, as that one becomes stronger, there will be less energy to run through the original governing scene habit pattern that you've established completely through chance.
And the more you practice it, the stronger that new circuit becomes. And the weaker the old one becomes, as long as you don't continue in those habits.
It's amazing.
I think it can happen pretty quick too. It did in my case. But it's interesting. It's interesting how that part of it works. And again, it's just a different way to approach this. And when you first start watching it, at first you're kind of like, I don't understand how this relates to me, because he's talking about trauma. But then you start to realize that that is the reason for all of the behavioral issues you're experiencing. And most people, when I give it to them, they have a hard time with it. To anyone out there,
I don't know anyone that can watch more than 2 hours of that and not immediately see themselves in what he is talking about.
I think everyone at some point in their life has experienced trauma, whether it was through their parents or through school, adolescence. There are trauma circuits being formed in everyone's head. And once we can understand that, and we can see that those circuits are not beneficial, and we can start focusing on building new circuits, I think that's when we start to see the greatest changes. And it's just a different way of looking at it. It seems that everybody seems to be kind of trying to battle against entrenched circuitry in their brains. And that's why I think so many people fail with beating their addictions, where it's more about, no, you've got to create the new circuits, and you've got to be able to push through that pain that you're going to experience as you're sitting there uncomfortable and feeling that sense of a depression or just an irritation and aggravation. That's you pushing that energy through that new circuit. And you have to give it time, and it does work its way out.
Yeah, it's amazing. Once you become aware that the anxiety you're feeling by engaging the resistance is literally just new circuitry developing in your brain. That pressure that you feel every time you engage the problem is not a psychological response. It's a physiological response to the new circuitry being created. You sense it as an emotional event, but really what it is you growing the circuit that is going to overcome the one that is actually holding you back. Once again, if you enjoy what you saw here, be sure to visit our website, Seniorthinktank.ca. There's all kinds of different PDFs and other information there on how energy law is influencing every aspect of your life. Be sure to keep watching this particular series, because we have more Bradshaw clips coming up where we're going to get into some of his actual procedures for overcoming that resistance that's in your mind right now and alleviating some of that pressure that is building up and holding you back. There's some very specific things that you can absolutely do to basically fry off the old circuitry that really is the problem. Most things that people are struggling with right now, as Chris said, we're focusing on the effect, not the cause. People drink too much, so they have a problem with alcohol, but they're not really dealing with the underlying emotional condition that is driving them to drink in the first place. And Bradshaw has some amazing techniques for getting through the other side of all the resistance that you're going to have to overcome to become the person that you actually were meant to be. So keep watching. Be sure to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next week.